Pregnant and alone on Halloween. Trapped into nightmare in the woods. Cassidy crouched behind an overturned wooden table, her heart racing so fast it hurt. The cabin walls groaned with every gust of wind, the air thick with dust and fear. Her navy blue sweater clung to her trembling body as she pressed both hands against her swollen belly, trying to silence the baby's restless kicks. Through the cracks in the rotting walls, she saw flickering torchlight moving closer, shadows of masked figures circling the cabin, their laughter echoing through the woods. She didn't know who they were or what they wanted. 30 minutes ago, she was driving home from her late shift when her car broke down on Skyline Drive. Now, she was trapped, alone, with no phone signal and nowhere to hide. A loud thud hit the door. Cassidy froze. Another knock, harder this time. She bit her lip to stop herself from screaming. "Come out," a voice hissed from outside. Tears rolled down her face as she whispered, "Please, not my baby." If you were Cassidy, pregnant and alone in the woods on Halloween night, what would you do? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more powerful stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. How did it all started? You just come with us. The sun was sinking behind the Appalachian peaks, washing the Blue Ridge Mountains in a soft orange glow as Cassidy drove along Skyline Drive. The winding road stretched endlessly ahead, bordered by thick forest and the shadowy ridges of Shenandoah National Park. It was Halloween evening, and the few cars she'd seen earlier had long disappeared. Only the steady hum of her old sedan kept her company. Cassidy tried to stay calm, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on her swollen belly. The baby moved gently, a quiet reminder she wasn't truly alone. She smiled faintly. "Almost there, sweetheart," she whispered. She had spent the past 2 days visiting her grandmother in Front Royal, who had begged her to rest before heading to her sister's house in Charlottesville. But Cassidy didn't want to stay. Not in her grandmother's town. Too many memories of her late husband, too many faces that looked at her with pity. The radio signal had cut off miles ago, leaving only the soft hum of the tires on the road and the whisper of wind outside. The forest grew darker with every mile, branches hanging low like outstretched arms over the road. Her headlights flickered once. Then again. "Come on, not now," Cassidy muttered, tapping the dashboard. A faint rattling sound rose from the hood. She frowned. It had started earlier that morning, a faint clatter she tried to ignore. Now it was louder, metal against metal. The engine sputtered. She pressed harder on the gas. Nothing. The car lurched forward, coughed, and slowed. "No, no, no." Cassidy's voice trembled. The dashboard lights blinked, then went black. The car rolled to a stop on a desolate stretch of road, 15 miles from Lurie. For a long moment, she just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, her breath fogging the glass. The forest was silent except for the faint rustle of dry leaves. She reached for her phone. No bars. Just no signal flashing at the top of the screen. Her chest tightened. "Okay. Think," she whispered to herself. She tried the ignition again, but the car refused to start. The air was cooling fast. She wrapped her sweater tighter, staring at the darkening horizon. She thought about waiting. Someone might pass by eventually. But she hadn't seen a single car in almost an hour. The ranger station, according to the sign she'd passed earlier, was 3 miles ahead. 3 miles didn't sound far, but walking it alone, pregnant, in the middle of the mountains as night fell, it terrified her. Still, staying here felt worse. She imagined sitting in the dark, her battery dying, the forest pressing close around her. She couldn't do that. Cassidy opened the glove compartment, grabbed her flashlight, and took a bottle of water from the passenger seat. She hesitated for a second, glancing back at the back seat where her hospital bag rested. She'd packed it weeks early, just in case. With a sigh, She unzipped it, pulled out a scarf, and wrapped it around her neck. 3 miles, she whispered, steadying her breath. You can do this. She stepped out of the car and locked it behind her. The sound of the door shutting echoed across the empty road. The wind brushed through the trees, carrying a faint whistle that made her shiver. She started walking south, her flashlight beam cutting a thin path through the growing darkness. The sky above was clear, the full moon beginning to rise. Its pale light bathed the treetops, casting strange, shifting shadows on the pavement. Every sound seemed sharper: the crunch of her boots, the occasional hoot of an owl, the distant creak of branches swaying in the wind. Cassidy tried not to think about her situation too much. She focused on her steps, counting them under her breath. 1, 2, 3. It helped her stay calm. Her mind wandered back to the reason she was traveling alone. It wasn't how she wanted things to be. After her husband's death, she'd felt lost. He had been her anchor, steady, kind, always knowing what to do when life got rough. But when the accident happened, she was only 2 months pregnant, and the world suddenly felt colder. Her family had offered help, but she couldn't bear the idea of being anyone's burden. So she tried to manage on her own. Every doctor's appointment, every lonely night, every reminder of what she'd lost. The trip tonight was supposed to mark a change, a fresh start with her sister's family before the baby arrived. She'd been hopeful that maybe, just maybe, things would start to feel normal again. But now, standing on this dark mountain road, she felt that hope slipping away. The wind picked up, chilling her through the sweater. She rubbed her arms and glanced behind her. The road stretched into blackness, her abandoned car barely visible in the distance. No headlights. No signs of life. Only silence. She kept walking. The moon climbed higher, casting silver light across the leaves. Sometimes, she thought she saw shapes move in the shadows beside the road, but each time she turned, there was nothing. Just trees, endless, silent trees. After about an hour, her legs started to ache. She leaned against a guardrail, catching her breath. The baby kicked hard, a firm jolt under her ribs. Cassidy placed a hand on her belly and forced a small smile. "Hey, it's okay," she whispered. "We're gonna find help soon." Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked. Cassidy froze. Her flashlight beam darted across the trees. Nothing moved. She swallowed hard and took a step forward, trying to stay calm. Probably a deer, she told herself, though her voice didn't sound convinced. The temperature dropped further, her breath turning white in the cold air. She tightened her scarf and continued walking, each step slower than the last. The road curved ahead into a darker stretch of forest where the moonlight barely reached. A feeling of unease crept over her, but she kept going. Turning back wasn't an option. 3 miles. That was all she needed to walk. 3 miles to safety. She told herself that again and again, even as the woods around her grew darker and the road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly into shadow. She didn't know it yet, but the real nightmare was just beginning. Cassidy's breath came out in small, visible clouds as she moved along the empty stretch of Skyline Drive. The cold bit through her jacket, settling deep into her bones. The forest on both sides pressed close, black and endless, the tall trees whispering in the wind. Her flashlight beam trembled with her unsteady hands, the narrow circle of light her only comfort in the growing dark. The baby kicked again, harder this time. She winced and placed a hand on her belly. "Easy, sweetheart," she whispered, forcing calm into her voice. "We're almost there. Just a little longer." Talking to her unborn daughter had become her way of holding on to courage, as if her voice could build a wall between them and the fear creeping in. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crunch of gravel under her boots. Every sound she made seemed too loud, echoing through the vast mountain night. She glanced back every few minutes, half expecting headlights or the glint of another person's flashlight. But there was nothing, only shadows that shifted with the wind. Cassidy kept her pace steady, counting her steps again, focusing on anything that would distract her from the ache in her legs. Her flashlight flickered once, making her heart skip. She tapped it, and the light steadied. "Don't you quit on me too," she muttered, her voice trembling. Then, far ahead in the distance, something caught her eye, faint orange glows, flickering between the trees. She stopped walking, squinting to see more clearly. The lights moved in uneven patterns, swaying gently. At first, relief washed through her. Maybe campers, or late-night hikers, or hunters returning to their trucks. People who could help. "Thank God," she whispered, quickening her pace. The lights grew brighter as she approached a curve in the road. There were several of them, at least 4 or 5 points of light, moving slowly but with direction, deeper within the woods. She waved her arm. "Hey! Over here!" No one answered. The lights continued to move, weaving through the trees. Cassidy frowned. The way they shifted didn't look right. They weren't standing still like lanterns or campfires. They were moving, almost in sync, as if being carried. Her stomach tightened. She hesitated on the roadside, watching. For a brief moment, the lights stopped moving altogether. Then, one by one, they began to spread out. A sudden burst of laughter shattered the silence. It was loud, wild, and sharp, echoing through the valleys around her. It wasn't cheerful or friendly. It was chaotic, the kind of sound that made her entire body tense. Her heart began to pound. Cassidy froze, gripping her flashlight tighter. The laughter came again, louder this time, joined by others. At least a dozen voices, men and women, laughing, shouting, calling out to one another. The noise carried easily through the cold mountain air, bouncing off the trees until she couldn't tell where it was coming from. Her first instinct was denial. Maybe it was just a Halloween gathering, people in costumes celebrating in the woods. But the more she listened, the more wrong it sounded. The laughter didn't fade, it grew closer, rolling toward her in waves. She stepped backward, off the road a little, her flashlight beam shaking as she scanned the trees. That's when she saw them. Figures moving between the trunks, each carrying a torch that burned with a harsh orange glow. There were more of them than she first thought. 10, maybe 12. They wore large, grotesque masks that glimmered under the firelight. Some were carved like skulls. Others had twisted animal faces or stretched grins painted in red. Their clothes were ragged and dark, torn in strange patterns that made their shapes hard to read. They moved with purpose, slow, deliberate steps, spreading out as if searching. Cassidy's throat went dry. Her mind fought to make sense of what she was seeing. Maybe it was a local Halloween ritual, or a group filming something. But even as she tried to convince herself, her instincts screamed otherwise. The way they moved, the way their heads turned sharply toward the road, it was focused. Intentional. She realized, with a sudden chill that ran through her spine, that they were looking for someone. For her. Her breath quickened. She stepped backward, one careful step at a time. The baby kicked hard again, almost as if reacting to her fear. She pressed a hand to her belly and whispered, "Please stay calm, please." Another wave of laughter erupted, closer this time. One of the figures raised their torch high, the flames lighting up the branches above. Cassidy ducked low and turned off her flashlight. The world plunged into near-total darkness, save for the scattered firelight weaving through the forest. Her heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else. She crouched near the edge of the road, watching the figures spread farther apart. Some were shouting words she couldn't understand, others humming a strange tune. Cassidy forced herself to think. The ranger station was still ahead, but there was no way she could walk past them without being seen. She needed to move quietly, maybe cut through the woods to rejoin the road further down. The thought of entering that forest alone terrified her, but staying meant being found. The torches moved again, closer to the road now. She could hear the dry crunch of boots on leaves, the soft whoosh of flames, and that laughter, always that laughter, rising and falling in the dark. She began to move, slow and careful, her shoes barely making a sound. Her hands trembled as she held her belly, trying to steady her breathing. The road curved sharply downhill, and she followed it, every nerve on edge. Behind her, one of the figures shouted. Another answered. Then, silence. Cassidy's fear spiked. She didn't look back, she just started walking faster, her steps longer, almost stumbling. She wanted to run, but the weight in her stomach made it impossible. The sound came again, footsteps, closer this time. Branches snapping. The flickering glow of torches pushing toward the road. They were following her. Cassidy's breath hitched. She gripped her flashlight, resisting the urge to turn it on. She could barely see now, the moonlight her only guide. Her boots slid on the loose gravel, but she didn't stop. The laughter broke out again, louder, echoing off the mountains like a terrible chorus. Her chest burned as she forced herself to move faster, her mind a blur of panic and determination. They were coming closer. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get away before they reached the road. She whispered to her unborn daughter, "Hold on, baby. Mommy's not giving up." But in the distance, just beyond the curve, she saw something flicker again, torchlight bouncing against the trees ahead. Her heart stopped. They weren't just behind her. They were all around. Cassidy's heart slammed against her ribs as the torchlight flared brighter behind her. The laughter had changed, less playful now, more urgent, more focused. She could hear them shouting to one another through the woods, their voices cutting across the cold mountain air. They were chasing her. Cassidy tried to run, as much as a 7-month pregnant woman could run. Her boots slipped on the uneven pavement, the cold air burning her lungs. Pain shot through her side, sharp and deep, but she kept moving. She didn't dare look back. Every instinct told her to keep going, to move faster before they closed in. The sounds behind her grew louder, snapping branches, heavy footsteps, the low hum of torches swaying through the trees. The laughter rose again, mixed with strange chants that sent chills down her spine. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. "Please," she whispered between breaths, clutching her belly. "Please, just stop kicking. Mommy's trying." The baby moved restlessly inside her, responding to her fear. Her flashlight swung wildly in her trembling hand as she stumbled along the road. The beam caught the dark outline of a trail branching off to the right, a narrow dirt path disappearing into dense woods. Cassidy stopped for half a second, torn between the safety of the open road and the darkness of the forest. The voices behind her grew clearer, closer. She turned toward the trail. Branches whipped against her face as she forced her way down the steep path. The ground was slick with wet leaves, roots jutting out like traps. She used trees to steady herself, scraping her palms and forearms as she went. The air grew colder, heavier, filled with the smell of damp soil. Behind her, the torchlight flickered through the trees. They had seen where she went. Cassidy pushed harder, half sliding down the slope. Her side cramped again, a sharp pain that made her cry out. She pressed her arm against it, biting down on her lip to keep quiet. She couldn't stop. Not now. Her flashlight beam danced across the ground, revealing rocks and roots inches before she tripped over them. She slipped once, catching herself on a fallen branch, her knees hitting the mud hard. Tears stung her eyes as she forced herself up again. "Come on," she gasped. "You can't stop now." The sounds behind her were getting closer, branches snapping, feet pounding, that awful laughter echoing through the hollow. She didn't know how many of them there were anymore. 5, 10, more? Every time she thought she'd gained distance, the glow of torches appeared again through the trees. Her thoughts raced wildly. Who were they? What did they want? Why her? She tried to think of explanations. Maybe it was a cult, or a Halloween group playing a cruel prank. But the way they chased her didn't feel like a game. It felt real. Desperate. Hungry. Her legs burned from exhaustion, her lungs on fire. She could barely breathe. The baby kicked again, harder, and she stumbled forward, catching herself on a tree trunk. She leaned against it, gasping, feeling her heartbeat thunder in her ears. The torchlight drew nearer, bouncing closer through the trees. Cassidy forced herself to keep going. Her hands were raw and bleeding, her knees scraped, but she didn't care. All she could think about was her baby, how she had to survive for her. The trail curved downward, opening into a shallow clearing surrounded by skeletal trees. In the center stood an old cabin, half swallowed by weeds and vines. The moonlight fell across its broken roof and sagging porch, the wooden boards warped and gray with age. Cassidy froze, staring at it. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, an old settler structure from the 1800s, maybe. One side of the roof had caved in, and the windows were nothing but black holes. The door hung crooked, creaking softly in the wind. The torchlight behind her grew brighter. She could hear the voices again, laughing, chanting, calling out to one another. She looked from the cabin to the dark forest beyond. There was no way she could keep running. Her legs were shaking. Her body felt heavy, weak, every breath scraping her throat raw. It was either face them out here, or take her chances inside. Cassidy took one last look behind her. The first of the torches appeared at the edge of the clearing, glowing orange against the trees. She could see shapes moving, masks gleaming under the firelight. She didn't think twice. She ran for the cabin. Her boots thudded against the soft earth as she crossed the clearing. The baby kicked again, but she didn't slow down. She grabbed the doorframe and pushed hard. The door swung inward with a loud groan. A cloud of dust rose up, stinging her eyes. The smell hit her immediately: mold, rotting wood, damp earth. She stepped inside and slammed the door shut behind her. For a moment, she stood in total darkness, her chest heaving, her ears filled with the sound of her own breathing. The wooden floor creaked beneath her weight. Moonlight filtered through the broken roof, faintly illuminating the small, empty room. Cassidy leaned against the wall, trying to steady herself. Her heart wouldn't slow down. Her entire body trembled. She listened carefully. No sound inside except her breathing and the faint hum of the wind. Outside, the laughter continued, fainter now, but still there. The torchlight moved past the windows, flickering through the cracks in the walls. Cassidy crouched low, backing away from the door. She spotted an overturned table near the corner and crawled toward it, hiding behind it as best she could. The baby shifted again, pressing against her ribs. She whispered softly, "It's okay, honey. Mommy's here. We're safe for now." The wind rattled the door. She pressed her hand against her belly, closing her eyes, forcing herself to breathe quietly. From outside, she heard one of them call out, a deep voice, muffled by the mask. Another voice answered, closer this time. Footsteps circled the cabin, slow and deliberate. Cassidy clamped her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. The torchlight flickered again through the cracks, crawling across the walls like fire. They were right outside. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she crouched lower, the rough floor pressing against her knees. Her mind screamed for her to stay still, to not make a sound. A heavy silence fell over the clearing. The laughter stopped. Even the forest seemed to quiet. Cassidy held her breath. A moment later, a single voice spoke softly outside the door, so low she almost couldn't hear it. Then came the slow, drawn-out creak of the hinges as the door began to open. Cassidy pressed her back against the damp cabin wall, her breath uneven and sharp. The air inside was thick with the smell of mold and rot, like something long forgotten. Moonlight slipped through the cracks in the roof, forming thin, trembling lines across the dirt floor. Dust floated in the air, stirred by every desperate breath she took. Her eyes darted around the room. An overturned table, a rusted iron bed frame, pieces of broken furniture scattered like bones. The stone fireplace was black with soot, its last fire probably dead for decades. She crouched behind the table, one hand clutching her belly, the other gripping the splintered wood for balance. The baby kicked again, hard this time, as if warning her. Cassidy whispered softly, her voice trembling, "It's okay, sweetheart. I won't let anything happen to you." But she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. Outside, footsteps crushed the fallen leaves. Dozens of them. Voices murmured in low, muffled tones, too far to understand, yet close enough to send chills down her spine. The orange glow of torches flickered through the gaps in the wall, moving like fireflies closing in on their prey. Cassidy's eyes darted to the small window near the back. It was cracked but blocked by rotted boards nailed from the outside. She ran her hands along the edges, pulling at them, but they wouldn't budge. Panic rose in her chest like floodwater. There was no other door. No way out. Her breathing quickened. She tried to silence it, pressing her sleeve against her mouth. The baby shifted again, a reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself. Tears filled her eyes, blurring the dim light as she whispered another broken prayer. Outside, the laughter started again, loud and wild, echoing through the forest like a chant. Cassidy froze. They were right outside the cabin now. She could hear them circling, their boots crunching on dry twigs, the wooden walls creaking under the strain of their shadows. One of them scraped something sharp across the door, a long, slow drag that made her stomach twist. She pressed her forehead to her knees, trying to hold in a sob. The world outside felt alive, but not in any way she understood. Every sound was magnified, the wind pressing through the gaps in the walls, the creak of old wood shifting, the faint rattle of the table she leaned against. Then, without warning, the noise stopped. All of it. The laughter, the voices, the footsteps, gone. Even the forest had gone silent. No wind. No crickets. Nothing. Just the sound of her own pulse pounding in her ears. Cassidy held her breath, afraid that even a single exhale would give her away. Seconds stretched into minutes. The silence was so heavy it hurt. Her eyes strained toward the door. It stood slightly ajar, the pale moonlight spilling across the threshold. For a moment, she thought maybe they'd left. Maybe they'd moved on. Her shoulders loosened slightly, but only for an instant. A single footstep broke the stillness. Slow. Deliberate. It came from right outside the door. Cassidy clutched her belly tight. Her heartbeat thudded against her ribs. She could feel every inch of her body trembling. Another step. The wooden planks moaned under the weight. She wanted to move, to hide deeper in the shadows, but her body wouldn't obey. Her legs were stiff, her breath caught halfway up her throat. The baby kicked again, harder this time. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. Then came the sound of the door creaking open, just a few inches at first. The hinges whined, loud enough to make her flinch. The narrow beam of moonlight widened, crawling across the cabin floor toward her hiding spot. Cassidy's eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth, praying whoever it was couldn't hear her breathing. The light stopped moving. Silence again. She waited, every nerve in her body screaming for her to run, though there was nowhere left to go. The door creaked wider. A shadow stretched across the floor. Cassidy's trembling hand reached for the broken chair leg beside her, the only thing in reach that could serve as a weapon. She gripped it tight, knuckles white, ready to swing if she had to. The footsteps entered the cabin. Slow. Careful. The floorboards whispered under the weight of whoever was inside. Cassidy could see the faint outline of a figure now, tall, broad, holding something that flickered faintly like dying firelight. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. Her whole body felt on edge, frozen between fear and instinct. The shadow moved closer. The wood beneath their feet groaned with each step. She tried not to blink, tried not to breathe, her pulse matching the rhythm of the intruder's slow advance. Another step. Then another. The glow of the torch or lantern, whatever it was, spilled further into the room. Cassidy pressed her back against the wall, gripping the chair leg tighter, ready to protect her unborn child with everything she had. The figure stopped. Just a few feet away. Silence. For one unbearable second, Cassidy thought she saw the faintest shape of a mask reflecting in the dim light, the same grotesque design she'd seen outside in the woods. Her stomach turned cold. The baby kicked again, sharp and sudden. The figure tilted their head, as if listening. Cassidy's breath caught in her throat. Before she could react, the torchlight flared brighter, flooding the room in orange, and a low, distorted laugh filled the air. Everything inside her screamed to run, but there was nowhere left to go. If you were Cassidy, hiding in that cabin with no way out, what would you do? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story has your heart racing, make sure to hit the subscribe button, because what happens next will leave you breathless. The nightmare is just beginning. The voice that came through the silence was gentle, almost trembling. I know you're in here, it said softly. Please, don't be afraid. We're not going to hurt you. Cassidy froze. For a moment, she couldn't tell if it was real or something her terrified mind had created. Through the half-open door, a figure stood backlit by moonlight, holding a torch that flickered against the cabin walls. Her body tightened. She pressed her back to the cold floor, one arm wrapped around her belly. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. The figure took a cautious step forward. It's all right, the voice continued. My name's Ruth Patterson. Cassidy squinted through the shadows. The woman looked to be around 60, her gray hair tucked beneath a wool hat. What Cassidy had thought was a grotesque mask was actually paint, thick streaks of white and black across her face, glowing faintly in the torchlight. Ruth slowly lowered the torch and lifted both hands, showing she meant no harm. You must be the woman whose car broke down on Skyline Drive. We've been looking for you. Cassidy blinked, confused, still unable to let go of her fear. Looking for me? Her voice came out cracked and weak. Yes, Ruth said gently. We saw your car by the overlook. Door open. Keys still inside. We thought you might have gone for help and gotten lost. Cassidy's mind struggled to catch up. Her breathing was still fast, her whole body trembling. Who are you? Ruth smiled faintly. We're with the Lurie Historical Society. It's our Halloween hike. Every year we walk these woods with torches, following the old settlers' trails. The paint, she gestured to her face, is part of a Celtic tradition. The masks and markings were used to chase away bad spirits. We mean no harm. As if on cue, more figures appeared behind her in the doorway. They weren't monsters, they were ordinary people. Men and women in warm jackets and hiking boots, their faces streaked with similar patterns of paint. They carried blankets, thermoses, and first aid kits, not weapons. Cassidy's eyes widened as her fear began to collapse under the weight of realization. All that chasing, the laughter echoing through the trees, the torches that had surrounded her, none of it had been an attack. It had been a search. Ruth took a careful step forward, still speaking softly. We were shouting your name, calling out to you. But sound travels strange here. The The valleys twist it around, make it echo. We were afraid you were hurt. Cassidy's voice shook. I thought you were coming after me. I ran. Ruth nodded with understanding. I know. It must have been terrifying. But you're safe now. For the first time since her car broke down, Cassidy let out a deep breath. The tension drained from her body so suddenly her knees gave way. Ruth rushed forward and caught her by the arm, steadying her. It's all right, Ruth whispered, lowering her to sit on the floor. You've had a terrible fright. Cassidy's tears came fast, not of fear anymore, but of release. Her body shook as she tried to breathe through the sobs. The baby moved again inside her, stronger now, almost as if sensing the change. From the doorway, a young woman stepped in carrying a blanket. Here, she said gently, kneeling to wrap it around Cassidy's shoulders. You're freezing. Another man placed a thermos beside her. It's tea. Still warm. Cassidy nodded weakly, unable to speak. Her throat burned with exhaustion. The warmth of the tea against her hands felt like life returning. Ruth crouched beside her, the torchlight flickering across her lined face. You were alone out there for a long time, she said softly. Your mind did what all minds do when we're scared. It filled in the blanks. The laughter, the shadows, the movement. It all felt dangerous, but it wasn't. Cassidy looked up, her lips trembling. I thought my baby and I were going to die out there. Ruth's expression softened. Not tonight, dear. You're safe now. We're going to take care of you. The others murmured quietly among themselves, gathering supplies, keeping their movements calm and gentle. The tension that had once filled the cabin was replaced by warmth, soft voices, careful hands, light where there had been darkness. Cassidy leaned her head back against the wall, her eyelids fluttering. The adrenaline that had carried her this far was gone, leaving only exhaustion. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of normal human kindness wash over her, the rustle of coats, the pouring of tea, the murmured reassurances. Her mind replayed everything, the torchlight through the trees, the laughter echoing in the mountains, her desperate run through the forest. Each memory twisted itself into something new, something less monstrous, now that she knew the truth. The sound she'd feared most, that wild laughter, had been her rescuers calling her name. The light she'd run from had been the very thing that might have saved her sooner. Tears slipped down her cheeks again, but this time they were quiet, steady, cleansing. Ruth sat beside her, resting a reassuring hand on Cassidy's shoulder. You're strong, she said quietly. You kept going when anyone else might have given up. Cassidy let out a shaky breath. I thought I was losing my mind. Ruth smiled softly. No. You were just lost. Happens to everyone at some point. Outside, the moonlight glowed across the clearing, silvering the grass where moments ago fear had ruled. Inside, the torches burned steady, a sign not of danger, but of rescue. For the first time that night, Cassidy felt warmth spread through her chest. Her body sagged with relief, her trembling finally slowing. She looked at Ruth and whispered, "Thank you." Ruth shook her head gently. "Don't thank me yet. Let's get you out of here, sweetheart. You've had a rough night." As Ruth helped her to her feet, Cassidy glanced once more at the cabin, the dark, broken shelter that had witnessed her terror and her salvation in the same breath. Her heart still pounded, but this time it wasn't fear. It was gratitude, for light in the darkness, for strangers who had cared enough to search, and for the sudden, overwhelming realization that she and her baby were going to be all right. Ruth steadied Cassidy, her hands warm despite the chill of the night. "Easy now," she whispered. "You've done the hardest part. Let us take it from here." Cassidy leaned into her support, her legs shaky and numb. The blanket clung to her shoulders, damp from her tears and the cabin's cold air. Outside, a small group waited quietly, their torchlight softer now, no longer threatening, a circle of care instead of fear. An elderly man stepped forward, his face lined with age but kind in expression. "Here, miss," he said, offering his arm. "Take your time. The ground's uneven." Cassidy nodded weakly, grateful beyond words. A young woman walked ahead of them, holding her torch higher to light the narrow trail leading away from the cabin. Her voice was calm and steady as she spoke over her shoulder. "It's not far. About half a mile to where we parked the van." They began to walk together, slow and careful. The night air was sharp, but it carried a strange peace now, the kind that comes after surviving something you thought you wouldn't. Each crunch of leaves beneath their boots felt like a step away from fear and back toward life. Ruth stayed beside Cassidy, her arm always ready to steady her. "You did the right thing leaving your car," she said softly. "If you'd stayed, the cold might have gotten worse. The mountains can turn dangerous fast this time of year." Cassidy managed a small smile. "I thought I was making everything worse by walking." Ruth chuckled gently. "Most of us think that when we're scared. The truth is, fear just makes the world louder. Every sound feels closer, every shadow feels alive." Cassidy's breathing began to even out. She could hear the wind in the trees, not as a threat anymore but as a reminder of where she was, deep in the mountains, surrounded by people who cared enough to find her. After a few minutes, Ruth spoke again, her tone warm and thoughtful. "You know," she said, "most things that seem frightening are just misunderstood. The real dangers out here aren't monsters or ghosts. It's the cold. It's losing your way. The human imagination does the rest." Cassidy nodded, the truth of it settling into her like warmth after a storm. They continued along the trail. The group moved as one, a quiet, protective force around her. One man carried a lantern to help spot roots and rocks on the path. Another kept checking behind them to make sure everyone stayed together. Small gestures, but each one filled Cassidy with gratitude so strong it hurt. By the time they reached the van parked near the Morris Creek trailhead, the first signs of dawn were softening the horizon. The headlights cut through the fog as someone opened the sliding door and spread blankets across the seats. "Let's get you warm," Ruth said, helping Cassidy inside. She poured tea from a thermos and handed it to her. "Drink slow. You've been through a lot." Cassidy took a sip, her hands trembling slightly as the steam rose to her face. The heat of the tea and the hum of the van's engine felt unreal, as if she had stepped out of one world and into another. Ruth sat beside her while the others loaded their torches and supplies. "We'll take you straight to the UVA Medical Center in Charlottesville," she said firmly. "No arguments." Cassidy started to protest, but Ruth raised a hand with a smile. "You're not in a state to drive. Let us do something good with this night." The road wound through the dark hills, the torch-bearing hikers now replaced by the hum of tires on asphalt. Inside the van, the group began to talk, stories about the mountains, about old families and forgotten legends, about why they still honored the old Celtic tradition every Halloween. One man named James spoke quietly from the driver's seat. "It started as a way to remember our roots," he said. "To walk the same trails settlers once walked, to keep their stories alive. But it's really about community, showing up for each other." Cassidy listened, comforted by their voices. The fear that had consumed her hours ago now felt distant, like something from a dream. As the miles passed, Ruth shared her own story, of growing up in Lurie, of losing her husband years earlier, and how leading these Halloween hikes had given her purpose again. "You meet all kinds of people in these mountains," she said softly. "Sometimes you rescue them. Sometimes they rescue you." Cassidy smiled faintly, resting a hand on her belly. The baby shifted under her palm, steady and strong. "I think she's happy it's over," she murmured. Ruth chuckled. She's a fighter, like her mother. By the time they reached the hospital in Charlottesville, the sun had begun to rise behind the ridges. The group stayed with her through the intake, refusing to leave until doctors assured them both mother and baby would be fine. Cassidy lay in the exam room, eyes closed, listening to the rhythmic beeping of the fetal monitor. The nurse smiled. "Strong heartbeat," she said. "You and your little one are doing just fine." Tears filled Cassidy's eyes again, quiet ones this time, born not from fear, but from relief so deep it almost hurt. When she finally emerged into the waiting area, still wrapped in a hospital blanket, the entire group was there: Ruth, James, the young woman, and the elderly man who had steadied her on the trail. They rose as she entered, smiling with quiet joy. Cassidy hesitated, overwhelmed. "You stayed?" Ruth nodded simply. "Of course we did. You don't leave family behind, even when you just met them." Cassidy tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. "I don't even know how to thank you." Ruth took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You already did," she said. "You made it through. That's thanks enough." For the first time since the nightmare began, Cassidy smiled fully, a tired, fragile smile, but real. Around her, the faces that had once seemed frightening now glowed with warmth. The torches were gone, replaced by morning light streaming through the hospital windows. She looked at them, these strangers who had chased her through the night, and realized that fear had turned them into monsters in her mind. But they had always been rescuers. And somehow, in their kindness, she had found something she didn't know she'd lost: faith in people, in compassion, in the quiet power of care. Cassidy couldn't find the right words to thank Ruth, though she tried, more than once. The woman only smiled, shaking her head gently. "You don't owe us anything," Ruth said. "You would have survived. I could see that strength in you. But I'm glad we could help." There was something about her tone, steady, reassuring, that made Cassidy's eyes sting. For so long she had been told she was weak, that she couldn't make it on her own. Yet here was someone who saw strength where others saw failure. Ruth placed a comforting hand on Cassidy's shoulder. "That's what communities are for, looking out for each other, especially in the dark times." By morning, the members of the Historical Society had made sure Cassidy was safe and settled. They stayed until her sister arrived, bringing warm clothes, food, and an emotional embrace that spoke of worry and love. But Ruth and her group didn't stop there. They arranged for Cassidy's broken-down car to be towed from Skyline Drive and covered the repair cost through a local volunteer program. When Cassidy tried to pay them back, Ruth refused with a chuckle. "No, dear. Consider it a Halloween gift for that little one you're carrying." Cassidy placed a hand over her belly, feeling a soft flutter in response. The thought of her unborn child growing inside her filled her with gratitude, and a strange, quiet awe. Before leaving, Ruth pressed a folded slip of paper into Cassidy's hand. "That's my number. And the Historical Society meets every month. You're welcome anytime. Someday, tell your daughter this story. Tell her about the night that began in fear but ended in kindness." Cassidy nodded, unable to speak. Her throat tightened, tears blurring her vision as Ruth and the others waved goodbye. When she finally reached her sister's house, the events of that night played over and over in her mind. The broken-down car, the flickering lights, the laughter in the woods, the cabin, the sudden rescue. It all felt like a lifetime compressed into a single night. She found herself replaying Ruth's words in quiet moments. "Most things that seem frightening are just misunderstood." In the days that followed, Cassidy stayed in touch with the Historical Society. They sent photos from their community events, restoring old cabins, cleaning up trails, helping hikers. Each message reminded her that compassion often hides in unexpected places, and that fear can blind us to what's real. 3 months later, on a crisp February morning, Cassidy went into labor. Snow dusted the rooftops outside the hospital window as she brought a healthy baby girl into the world. The doctor placed the newborn in her arms, and Cassidy knew instantly what her name would be. Hope, she whispered. The name carried the weight of everything that had happened. The terror, the courage, the kindness of strangers who refused to walk away. Hope wasn't just for her daughter's future, but for the lesson she had learned that Halloween night. That light could be found even in the darkest corners of the woods. Weeks later, Ruth visited the new mother, bringing a small hand-carved toy, a tiny wooden owl. For her, Ruth said with a smile. Owls see clearly in the dark. I think she'll take after her mother. Cassidy laughed softly, emotion tightening her voice. Thank you. For everything. Ruth only shrugged. Just promise me you'll pass it on someday. Kindness is meant to travel. It's how we keep the world from losing its light. As Ruth left, Cassidy watched through the window, her daughter asleep in her arms. The baby's tiny fingers curled around her own, warm and steady. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees outside, Cassidy whispered a quiet vow to her daughter, that she would teach her to face fear with courage, to believe in people's goodness, and to remember that even in darkness, there is always hope. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need a reminder that kindness still exists in the world. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of courage, compassion, and second chances. Cassidy rocked baby Hope gently in her arms as the morning sun spilled through the hospital window. The world outside was quiet, wrapped in soft winter light. Her daughter's tiny face was peaceful, unbothered by the memories still echoing in her mother's mind. Cassidy thought back to that night in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The terror, the cold, the laughter that had turned the forest into something unrecognizable. But now, with hope against her chest, those memories carried a different weight. They were no longer just moments of fear. They were lessons carved into her soul. She had learned that fear could be a powerful deceiver. It could twist the shapes of trees into monsters, turn helping hands into threats, and transform torches meant for guidance into symbols of danger. Fear didn't always reveal truth. It often masked it. That night, what she had taken for pursuit had been rescue. What she thought was cruelty was, in fact, compassion coming toward her through the darkness. Vulnerability had changed how she saw the world, shrinking her vision until only the threat remained. But fear, she realized now, was not the enemy. It was part of being alive, something to walk through, not run from. True courage wasn't about being unafraid. It was about moving forward even when your heart is pounding and your hands are shaking. Cassidy understood that now more deeply than ever. She thought of Ruth and the Historical Society. Their warmth, their laughter, the care they'd shown to a frightened stranger on a cold Halloween night. Love wasn't always found in grand gestures. Sometimes, it was in simple things, a shared blanket, a steady arm, a refusal to walk away when someone needed help. Kindness, she had learned, is a choice. It asks something of you: time, patience, the willingness to see past your own comfort. But it's that choice that makes humanity possible. Over the following year, Cassidy stayed in touch with Ruth and the others. They exchanged photos, letters, and updates. When Hope turned 6 months old, the group sent a small quilt hand-stitched with mountain patterns and the words "You are never alone." When Halloween came again, Cassidy returned to the Blue Ridge Mountains with Hope nestled against her chest. The night air was cool, and the forest was alive with the same flickering orange lights. But this time, they meant something entirely different. She joined Ruth and the group for their annual torchlit hike through the woods. The laughter she once feared now made her smile. The torches illuminated faces filled with warmth, not menace. Where she had once run in terror, she now walked in peace. As they paused at a lookout point, Ruth handed Cassidy a torch. "Full circle," she said quietly. "You found your way back." Cassidy nodded, holding the torch high as the wind rustled through the trees. She looked down at Hope's sleeping face and whispered, "See the lights, baby? They used to scare Mommy. But they're not scary anymore, they're friends now." She pointed to the sky, where the constellations glittered above the ridge. "That one's Orion," she murmured. "And that one, the Hunter's Belt. When you're older, I'll tell you how we walked under those same stars one Halloween night." The story would become part of Hope's childhood, a bedtime tale not of monsters or fear, but of strangers who became heroes. Every autumn after that, Cassidy returned to the mountains with her daughter. Together, they visited the Lurie Caverns, hiked familiar trails, and shared meals with the friends who had once saved their lives. As Hope grew, she began to understand. She learned that her mother's story wasn't about danger, but about perspective. It was about seeing beyond fear, about trust, and about how goodness often wears ordinary faces. Cassidy's gratitude deepened with each passing year, not only for her rescue but for what that night had revealed about the world. The true nightmare hadn't been the masked figures or the torchlight. It had been isolation, the belief that she was alone, unseen, and without hope. The true miracle, she realized, was not supernatural at all. It was human beings choosing to care for someone they didn't know. Choosing to stop when it would have been easier to walk away. Choosing empathy over indifference. As Hope took her first steps on the same trail where her mother once stumbled in fear, Cassidy felt a quiet peace settle over her. The forest no longer whispered of danger but of endurance, love, and renewal. Holding her daughter close, she smiled softly and said, "Remember this, Hope. Even when the world feels dark and frightening, you are never truly alone. Someone, somewhere, will always be carrying a light." If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that courage and kindness still shape the world. Subscribe for more stories that shine light where fear once lived, and remind us that hope is never far away. Cassidy would carry that night with her for the rest of her life, not as a wound, but as a reminder of what it truly means to survive. Kindness and courage had proven stronger than fear. Love had lit the path through the woods when everything else had seemed lost. In the years that followed, Cassidy's world changed in quiet, meaningful ways. She parented with patience she hadn't known she possessed, teaching Hope that bravery wasn't loud or reckless, it was steady and compassionate. She told her daughter often that courage was choosing to do what's right, even when your voice shakes, and that kindness doesn't need to be earned, it should simply be given. Every small act of generosity she performed felt like part of a larger chain, stretching backward to Ruth, to the people who had stopped in the dark that Halloween night, and forward into Hope's future. Cassidy saw it in the way her daughter smiled at strangers, offered her toys to other children, or comforted someone who was crying. That single night of compassion had rippled outward, quietly shaping the years that followed. When Hope grew old enough to ask about her name, Cassidy told her the story in full: the rain, the torches, the terror, and the people who turned fear into salvation. Hope would listen wide-eyed, always reaching for her mother's hand at the part where Ruth appeared in the doorway. "They weren't monsters," Cassidy would say softly. "They were helpers. They just looked different in the dark." That lesson stayed with them both. The world isn't divided neatly into danger and safety, good and evil. Much of life lies in how we choose to see, and what we choose to do when fear tempts us to turn away. Cassidy had learned that courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about walking toward the light, even when your steps trembled. Each year, as autumn returned and the first leaves began to fall, Cassidy and Hope would drive back to Lurie. They'd meet Ruth and the Historical Society for the torchlit hike, retracing the path that once felt endless. The glow of torches now filled Cassidy's heart with peace instead of panic. What was once a nightmare had become a story of redemption, a symbol of the strength that comes when people choose compassion over fear. On one of those hikes, as Hope grew older, she tugged at her mother's sleeve and said, "Mom, the lights don't look scary at all. They look like stars that came down to help us see. Cassidy smiled, her heart swelling. That's exactly what they are, she whispered. Through the years, she would tell others about the night that changed everything, not for sympathy, but to remind people that goodness is still out there. That even in moments when the world feels dark, there's always someone willing to reach out a hand. Cassidy's experience shaped how she viewed people, how she raised her daughter, and how she moved through life. Every kind word, every moment of patience, every decision to help rather than ignore, it all felt like passing on a light that had once saved her. Because that night taught her one unshakable truth: kindness and courage are always stronger than fear. Love is the light that guides us through the darkest woods. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our powerful stories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers all across the country. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still exists in this world. Your likes, comments, and shares help us continue to bring you stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of the quiet goodness that still defines humanity. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community.